Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Concerned Citizen, and today we're going to be discussing whether or not Donald Trump can repeat his victory in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, from 2016 in the upcoming 2020 election against Joe Biden. If you enjoy our content, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. And let's, without further ado, get right into the data here. So we're going to start today with an article from 538.com, Why Pennsylvania Could Decide the 2020 Election. Well, it's pretty clear that Pennsylvania is a relatively important state. It's got 20 electoral votes, and you only need 270, so that's a decent chunk there. And it is kind of the biggest state in the Rust Belt, which is going to be a battleground area moving up this next election. Get right into this article. One of the things that 538 mentions is that right now Pennsylvania looks like it is the single most important state of the 2020 election. According to their presidential forecast, it's the likeliest state to basically give them a win, either presidential candidate, at the tipping point state of 31%. So then let's also look now down below. They have an 84% chance of winning if Trump wins Pennsylvania, and a 96% chance of winning the presidency if Joe Biden is the winner. So Pennsylvania is clearly kind of the key state this election cycle. Going on down below, they talk about few could have guessed that the Keystone State would eventually become the keystone of the Electoral College, since going into 2016, PA had voted for Democrats in 6 elections. However, it did actually go to Trump last time around, as many people know, by 0.7 percentage points, making it 2.9 points redder than the nation. So let's look at this data here. Is Pennsylvania now a Republican-leaning state? So we have three kinds of data here. We have the margin by which Pennsylvania went, we have the national margin, and we have the Pennsylvania lead. So for example, in 1952, we have here that the Republicans won the presidency by 5.9% in Pennsylvania. I believe that would have been Eisenhower. And then we have that in the national popular vote, Eisenhower actually won by nearly 10%. However, because the Pennsylvania vote was less than the national margin, what you see is a Democrat-leaning bias, or that Democrats have a greater percentage or a greater lean in Pennsylvania. And that trend continues all the way up until 2016. So I don't really like the format of this, so I took this data and I evaluated it in graphical form. And what you're going to see here is that the blue line is the Pennsylvania margin. So, whatever the amount of percent the winning candidate got. The US popular vote margin is also in orange. And lastly, yellow is PA lean. The most interesting thing to me about this graph, right, is that these last 4 years that I've highlighted, 4 elections, I should say, 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2006. And what you see is that Pennsylvania slowly gets less Democratic by percentage. In 2004, it was 4.9% more Democratic than the nation. In 2008, 3.1%. In 2012, 1.5%. And then in 2016, it was actually almost 3% more Republican than the nation. Hillary Clinton famously won the popular vote by 2.2%. However, the state of Pennsylvania went to Trump by almost 1%. And then you can see that here on this graph. This is the yellow line trending down. And you also see it, though, in the blue line as well, a little bit here, in that the margin essentially has gradually decreased for Democrats over the last couple election cycles. With the exception of 2004, you saw Obama won by almost half, Obama wins by 5.5, and then Trump wins by almost 1. So the question then is, will this trend continue, or Pennsylvania kind of return to its status as the keystone or the holder down of the blue wall? Let's look at some additional data here. As far as partisan lean goes, we look at Pennsylvania. We see that Pennsylvania is now actually a slightly Republican-leaning state at R+1, which is relatively interesting given the things that we just talked about. And if we look at the electoral map changes over the last, essentially, election since 2000, what we see is that Pennsylvania was relatively Democratic-leaning. It slowly kind of went back towards the baseline in 2012. It was not that much more partisan than the nation. And then in 2016, it went nearly 3 points Republican relative to the rest of the nation. The question is, will this trend continue? So to answer that question, let's look and see, what do the polls say. So if we look at the polls here, I'm on realclearpolitics.com, and they have their aggregate at 5.7%. Now I'm going to adjust this slightly, and here's how. I'm not a poll wizard. I'm not going to do anything like readjust the weightings or anything like that. But realistically, I do not believe that Joe Biden is going to outperform Barack Obama in Pennsylvania. I just don't see that happening. So essentially, I'm going to throw out the polls that are above Obama's margin of victory in 2012. That means this Biden +9, Biden +9, Biden +7, and Biden +6 are all gone. If we re-aggregate that data and do a new average, we get an average of approximately 3.75% for Biden. That still shows a relatively substantial lead for Joe Biden in the state of Pennsylvania. So then the question is, okay, are the polls accurate? Well, I'm not one of the people that has a ton of faith in the polls, but I'm also not one of the people that's going to say the polls are completely fake. I will say that on average, I've read a statistic that says that in the state of Pennsylvania, pollsters typically underestimated Donald Trump by about 2.6%. Is that happening this year? It's hard to say, and I guess we really won't know that until after the election happens. But we do have some articles, another article from Real Clear Politics, and they suggest that Trump again will outperform the polls. And basically, what you see here is a story of a man who drives a woman. He's from the local Republican committee, and he drives a woman to vote. And he wants to get a vote to be an elector for the party. And she is only going to vote for people that Trump has given her on a little list. Not Trump literally, but Trump's campaign. He talks about how the enthusiasm for Trump was at an all-time high, and then eventually Trump did win on election day. So what's the question here? Get down to the interesting part. Republicans have narrowed the registration gap by almost 150,000, and while the Philly suburbs have trended bluer, the other corner of the state has emerged in recent years as redder and redder. I'm actually from Pennsylvania, and that's why I care about this data. It's going to be interesting here. Trump has accelerated the trend in southwestern PA. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris declared war on coal and natural gas, which perhaps that's a bit hyperbolic, but I do know a lot of people in the area that feel that way, which would cost the Commonwealth hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs, is driving union households into the Trump column. I have family that are in unions, and a lot of them are extremely pro-Trump just based on this factor alone. The same shift is taking place in northeastern PA, especially in Luzerne County, once considered safely Democrat, but now swinging for Trump. Just a stone's throw away from Biden's birthplace, the county went for Obama in 2012, but Trump carried it in 2016. Since then, the trends have continued moving his way. The country's Democratic state senator switched his registration to independent and now caucuses with the GOP. Republicans took the majority on the city council and dramatically increased. His victory in PA did come by a razor-thin margin, and it figures to be a squeaker again this year, but voter passion and energy on Trump's side. Driving down the back roads of Pennsylvania, one sees reminders of Trump's drawing power. Spray painted on plywood and splashed on the carwood with tempera is a simple message, Trump. One of the things that he's going to talk about later on here is that Trump always outperforms the polls. And that's what I kind of referenced earlier, that he was underrepresented in the polls by about 2.6% in 2016. And they talk about the wide enthusiasm gap. I did see a recent poll from Florida that said that Trump had enthusiastic voters about 71 to 51, which is a relatively significant gap. Will that necessarily apply to Pennsylvania? It's hard to say. But again, the Philadelphia suburbs is another kind of hurdle here for the Trump campaign, but they're suggesting that perhaps the Philadelphia suburbs may not go as far left as Biden believes. I'm not of the opinion that Biden is really a hardline, far left candidate or anything like that. He has to make some compromises with his left wing to pragmatically gain votes. That's kind of how I see it. But likewise, Biden's proposed huge tax increases would hit the suburban pocketbooks hard. There's definitely some truth to that as well. So these people think that Trump might outperform the polls. There's also, no doubt, a massive registration surge for the GOP. And there's also a lot of enthusiasm. As I mentioned. This is an article from Politico. I want to be in the Trump party. GOP rides voter registration surge in key state. Since 2016, Republicans have netted nearly 7 times as many registered voters in Pennsylvania. Now, that sounds like a really good headline. You also have to realize that I think they're still down something like 750,000 in terms of registration. So usually not all Democrats and not all Republicans vote. So there's that to think about, and it's good for Republicans that they're narrowing the lead. But keep that in mind. So since 2016, they've netted nearly 7 times as many as registered Democrats here. The GOP has added almost 198,000 registered voters, whereas Democrats have gained an extra 29,000. And as you hear, they are down 750,000 voters still in the state. This strategist believes he's still bullish on Trump because, he thinks basically that the enthusiasm gap is so large. Harrisburg-based Republican strategist is this guy, Charlie Garreau, who has worked on presidential campaigns in the state. Trump is doing what Reagan did 40 years ago, he says, which is moving a lot of traditional Democrats into the Republican caucus. I can say from personal experience that I do know some working class folks who you would typically say might be union Democrats, as I mentioned earlier, are definitely drifting more towards the Republican Party. But the question is, do those trends hold up this year when you have Joe Biden, who's trying to paint himself kind of as the working class guy from Scranton? That's yet to be seen. If Trump loses support in that working class, non-college degree, white voter group, that's going to hurt his reelection chance pretty substantially. Overall, registered Democrats now make up 47% of the electorate, and Republicans compromise 39%. Now, that is up, but again, we're still talking about an 8% difference. So All these people are very bullish. It's Trump, 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 said Gloria Lee Snover, chairman of the Northampton County Republican Party. When she signed up voters, she added, they're like, oh, I want to be in the Trump party. It's kind of funny. I'm like, you mean the Republican Party? They're like, oh, yeah. Well, they're all bullish, but they are still down a significant percent. Yes, not all Democrats vote, not all Republicans vote, but the Republicans are gaining. They definitely have the enthusiasm gap in their favor. In the lead up to the 2016 election, where Hillary Clinton lost the state by less than 1 percentage point, Republicans likewise registered more net voters in key areas such as parts of northeastern PA. Rather than feeling a sense of deja vu, many Democrats said they are not concerned about the trend affecting the presidential result. As we can see here, they view the numbers as a lagging indicator that distracts from other strengths the party has with new voters and independents in the state. The biggest shift in PA in recent years, they said, has been Democrats making electoral gains since 2016, especially in the suburbs. It probably means less than meets the eye, said J.J. Balaban, a Democratic consultant in Pennsylvania. There's reason to believe the shift is mostly Democrats who haven't been voting for Democrats for a long time choosing to re-register as Republican. Republicans around the state said that they have benefited in recent months from the fact that the Trump campaign, which is sought to downplay the COVID-19 pandemic, has been knocking on doors and registering voters in person. Joe Biden's team has so far refrained from doing so. Some Democrats said that has posed a challenge, as they've had trouble registering people. Look, I'll be real, the pandemic has kind of thrown a wrench into things, said Jason Henry, executive director of PA's Democratic Party. Our focus has truly been on educating voters on the new vote-by-mail laws. Basically, they're going to talk about difficulties that they're having with getting voters, and they've registered or managed to outreach 3.4 million voters in the last times. And Republicans have made the biggest raw net gains in Westmoreland and Washington counties, which are both down there in southwestern PA. I live in that area. They're both definitely getting. That's almost obvious if you just drive around. However, interesting here. Democrats have netted more registered voters in the last 4 years than the GOP in Philadelphia suburbs. That's kind of the question here in 2016. Trump is going to win PA. His gains in his base in the more conservative areas of the state, the slightly more rural areas of the state, have to outweigh the gains Democrats make in the Philly suburbs, and then it comes down to a turnout war. So we could go through the rest of this article, but basically, it's just political strategists arguing about who's doing better in the state. And like I said, I'm not predicting that Trump is going to win Pennsylvania, but I wanted this to be an experiment in if Trump is going to win Pennsylvania, what factors have to go in his favor, and are those likely to happen? At this time, I think it's definitely possible that Trump wins PA. I'm not sure that's necessarily likely, but with a poll reweighted that we just talked about, about 4 points in favor of Biden, and historical underweighing of Trump in polls in the last election in 2016, I think it's more than possible that as this election tightens, you may see PA move, into the lean Democrat, the toss-up or tilt category, basically. So, if you enjoy our content, again, please like and subscribe. This is the Concerned Citizen. Thanks, and have a great day.